What happens when you stop explaining yourself, stop reacting, and simply disappear into silence? This video explores the hidden power behind emotional unavailability, not as a flaw, but as a profound form of strength, clarity, and self-preservation. You'll uncover why silence speaks louder than words, why detachment can be magnetic, and how vanishing from the noise can shake the world around you. What if everything you thought was weakness was actually your greatest power? Have you ever noticed how some people seem to shift the entire energy of a room, not by shouting, not by demanding attention, but by simply withdrawing? They don't argue, they don't plead, and yet their absence speaks louder than 1,000 words. When they choose silence over reaction, pause over impulse, everything around them begins to change. The dynamics shift. People get uncomfortable. They start to question themselves. They chase, they reflect. Now imagine this. What if you chose to do the same? What if, instead of reacting to everything, you chose to respond with deliberate silence? What if, instead of constantly showing up emotionally, mentally, and physically, you allowed yourself the space to become selectively unavailable? What would happen? Here lies the heart of the matter. When you stop being constantly accessible, emotionally, psychologically, physically, the world around you enters a sort of crisis. Because your presence, your attention, your reactions have become a source of validation, comfort, and control for others. Your availability has become a tool others rely on, not necessarily to support you, but to maintain their own emotional equilibrium. People learn to manipulate you through your predictability. They know how you'll respond. They depend on your emotional openness, not to connect deeply, but to keep you tethered to their needs. The moment you start withdrawing, not from weakness, but from conscious choice, the entire game changes. You move from being the one controlled to the one who controls the terms of engagement. Carl Jung once said, "Everything that irritates us about others can lead us to an understanding of ourselves." Now consider this. When you finally become less accessible, who gets irritated? Who tries to provoke a reaction? Who suddenly needs to reestablish emotional contact, not out of care, but because they're no longer receiving the energy they were used to feeding on? This is not a reflection of your absence. It's a reflection of how much your availability was being used. You have likely given yourself over and over again, agreeing when you wanted to refuse, responding when you were tired, listening when you needed silence, not because you were truly seen or loved, but because you feared the consequences of saying no, the consequence of disappointing, the consequence of being alone. And with each reactive moment, each forced yes, each emotionally draining interaction, a piece of your energy is chipped away. At the end of it all, you are left with fatigue, irritation, and a hollow sense of having been too much for others and not enough for yourself. This happens because you've been giving your time and emotional availability to people who didn't deserve even a minute of your silence. But this isn't a call to abandon the world or turn bitter. This is about choosing yourself, deeply, consciously, without apology. This is about individuation, a core concept in Jung's psychology. Individuation is the process of becoming whole, complete, and authentic. It begins when you stop centering your identity around other people's expectations and reactions. When you realize that silence isn't weakness, it's strength. That withdrawal, when done from clarity and not fear, is an act of power. So let me ask you something. How long will you continue to be controlled by the emotional reactions of others? How long will you play the role assigned to you? How often will you allow people to push your buttons, poke your wounds, and pull your strings? Maybe it's time to stop. When you retreat with awareness, you break the cycles that others depend on. You become a mystery, and when people can no longer predict you, they begin to realize they never really knew you in the first place. They only knew how to use you. You've been taught since childhood that love, worth, and belonging are earned through self-sacrifice, that your role is to be agreeable, responsive, helpful, and pleasant. And while these traits aren't inherently bad, when they are used excessively, they become a prison. A beautiful, noble-looking prison built on guilt and fear. Excessive availability is not kindness. It's a form of self-erasure. As long as you allow yourself to be permanently open to others, emotionally, mentally, physically, you will be used. Not always maliciously, sometimes unconsciously, but used nonetheless. Because when people can predict your response, your presence, your forgiveness, your emotional labor, you cease to be a person to them. You become a function, a resource, a solution, an emotional bandage. But you don't see it that way. You still think that by always being present, someone will finally be present for you. That if you keep proving your loyalty and goodness, someone will return it. But the world doesn't work like that. Jung spoke of the persona, the mask we wear to be accepted and valued by society. Your constant availability is one such mask. You say yes when you're breaking inside. You answer messages when you're drained. You listen when you have nothing left to give. You explain and justify as though the world is owed an account of your every move. But the more you perform for others, the further you drift from your core. Constantly being there for others is often a subtle form of abandoning yourself. It's a quiet, polite betrayal of your own needs, done in the name of connection, approval, and not rocking the boat. Yet this betrayal has consequences. It leaks your energy, bit by bit. And what's left is not peace, but exhaustion. A bone-deep fatigue that no sleep or vacation can fix. Those who want you always accessible don't truly want you. They want what you give them. Validation. And when you stop providing that, they get frustrated. They say you've changed, that you're distant, that you're cold. But the truth is, you've stopped being functional to their needs. Here's the paradox. The more available you are, the less you're valued. Because in human nature, abundance without effort often breeds neglect. People don't respect what they don't have to earn, and they certainly don't value what's always there. So now the real question becomes, who truly deserves your time? Your attention, your energy, or better yet, who deserves your absence? Before you answer, pause and reflect. Because this isn't just about external relationships, it's about your internal programming. Why do you keep reacting? Why do you feel compelled to reply, to fix, to please? The answer lies in something Jung called psychic energy, and that's where we'll go next. Because until you learn how to guard your energy, someone else will always find a way to drain it. Carl Jung introduced the idea of psychic energy, the mental and emotional fuel we use to interact with the world. Every thought you dwell on, every emotional reaction you allow, every conversation you entertain, consumes psychic energy. And unlike physical energy, this isn't easily replenished by sleep or food. It's deeper. When it's drained, you feel it in your soul. The numbness, the resentment, the weariness. Think about it. You've had days where you didn't do much physically, yet you felt exhausted because you spent hours ruminating over a conversation, worrying about someone's reaction, or explaining yourself to someone who had already made up their mind. That's psychic exhaustion, and it comes from overgiving. Now here's the problem. Most people don't even realize they're leaking psychic energy every day. It happens in tiny, consistent ways. Our gauges. Constantly replying to messages out of obligation, or engaging in conversations you're not emotionally available for. Overthinking how someone might perceive your silence. Engages for prioritizing yourself. Explaining your boundaries to people who've already violated them. Each of these moments chips away at your center. They feel small in isolation, but collectively, they're devastating. If you're constantly feeling drained, uninspired, or resentful, you're likely giving your energy to the wrong places and to people who aren't equipped to receive it with respect. That's where conscious withdrawal becomes a radical act of self-preservation. Withdrawing is not disappearing, it's not ghosting or abandoning. It's choosing to reclaim the pieces of yourself that have been scattered through constant people-pleasing, emotional labor, and reactive behavior. When you stop reacting, stop explaining, and stop being available on demand, you're no longer in the cycle of emotional transaction. You're no longer performing your value. You're simply being. And that being is powerful, rare, and incredibly difficult for others to manipulate. This is why your silence feels like punishment to some people. Not because you're doing anything wrong, but because they can no longer access the parts of you they used to take without asking. And when you no longer hand over your energy easily, some will fall away. Let them. Because those who only valued you when you were emotionally accessible, constantly responsive, and endlessly forgiving were never really connected to you in the first place. They were connected to your function. Jung said, Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life and you will call it fate. In other words, if you don't become aware of your people-pleasing, overgiving patterns, you'll keep attracting the same emotionally demanding, draining relationships and call it bad luck. But it's not luck. It's programming. Somewhere along the line, you were taught that your worth depends on what you offer others. That being liked, accepted, and loved means being useful, agreeable, and emotionally available, even at your own expense. That's not love. That's performance. You deserve connection that doesn't depend on you betraying yourself. And that kind of connection begins when you create boundaries, not as walls to shut people out, but as sacred space to protect your energy. This kind of energy management is not selfish, it's spiritual hygiene. Because when you allow everyone access to your mind, your heart, your time, you start to disappear. You feel invisible, unappreciated, and unseen. But the truth is, you've been showing up everywhere except for yourself. Let's be clear. The right people will respect your boundaries. They will not interpret your silence as rejection. They won't need explanations for every pause, every no, every moment of withdrawal. They will trust the bond, even in quiet moments. But the wrong people, the ones who depend on your predictability, your emotional labor, your constant presence, will try to provoke you when you pull away. They will push your buttons. They will say you've changed, that you're distant, that you're selfish. They will try to reestablish control, not because they care, but because they miss the version of you that was easier to use. And you'll be tempted to return, not out of love, but out of habit, out of guilt, out of fear of being misunderstood. Don't. Stay with the discomfort. Let it stretch you. Let it teach you how often you've abandoned yourself just to avoid abandoning others. Because here's the truth, you're not hard to love. You're just tired of giving love to people who mistake access for entitlement. Not everyone deserves a front row seat to your life. Not everyone should have the privilege of your presence, your vulnerability, your truth. So for enlightenment and love, you are not required to answer every message, justify every boundary, or engage in every emotional conflict. Your energy is sacred, your time is sacred, your attention is sacred. Once you start treating it that way, your world will change. You'll see who respects your space, who honors your silence, who meets you with mutual energy rather than neediness. And more importantly, you'll begin to respect yourself again. Not as someone who's always available, but as someone who's deeply attuned to their own needs and no longer apologizing for them. Because here's the paradox of withdrawal. The more you learn to pull back, the more clarity you gain. You begin to see who truly sees you and who only saw what you could give. So don't be afraid to go quiet, to disappear for a while, to pull your energy back into yourself. The people who are meant to be in your life won't be threatened by your healing. They'll be inspired by it. And as for the rest, let them meet themselves in the silence you leave behind. There comes a moment in every self-healing journey when you stop chasing closure and start creating peace. When you no longer need the last word, the final explanation, or the validation of being understood. You simply release and return to yourself. This return isn't dramatic. It's not loud or flashy. In fact, it often looks like boredom to others. But that quiet space, that's where your real life begins again. You start to notice things you couldn't see before because your energy was too tied up in managing other people's emotions. The difference between lonely and. You will wonder what happened to you, why you're not as friendly, giving, or present as you once were. They might even say you've changed, and they're right, you have. You're no longer emotionally accessible in the ways you used to be. You've stopped leaking energy. You've stopped performing availability. You've stopped making yourself digestible for people who are never going to nourish you. And that shift, though invisible to most, is everything. Because now you are no longer in survival mode. You're not operating from the anxious need to be liked or chosen. You're not scanning rooms for cues to perform. You're rooted, grounded, selective. You don't need everyone to understand your boundaries anymore. You just need to uphold them. You don't need to justify your absence. You just need to honor it. You don't need to explain your healing. You just need to live it. And in that shift, you attract differently. Not because you're trying to, but because you're vibrating at a different level. You're no longer trying to earn love. You are love. You're no longer auditioning for roles in other people's stories. You're writing your own. This energy is magnetic, not because it seeks attention, but because it radiates wholeness. You're not looking to be saved. You've already rescued yourself. This kind of presence terrifies the emotionally immature. It confuses the manipulative. It frustrates those who depended on your wounds to relate to you. But it deeply resonates with people who have done their own work. So as you continue to return to yourself, expect some things to fall away. The US actually results that lapes the rotuarn, that used to drain you. Actually essential tushur basi, aroma soars actually dense, the most more works that refamentation giving you. They cert not only actually, evered of you. This is not practice before the maindas licks and promises. Are not farsted to into a morrow, we have a success. Everything that you have the world onto a board it's like. But because I am not a new someone to prouses, whether it's not to know, in Nas tonight. It's truly, to tech your power row, board man your gas is here, to be to a transfer you on you wanted to leave. He filled cars with the next negatives. The guard has helped down the more madisters, you're realitated aboard man your gases. As self-words charms of sans here. You're a self-words burge tards, if all have no shans to shout out, with 1 times faster. Unlike the Embergene, that hearing up in media order, mentioned that you have many resolutions done in self-analysis on the market, either ace bears with the robbers with her, and that this is quite the same but menaced by, are here. Remember what their games to be here. As you don't, greeting the world, are this attentional world, in terms of high cards, to go with everything down day. On the robber chat is times occurring, on the robberous are credding more bossed. And when you live from that place, you no longer chase anything. You trust that what's meant for you will not require self-abandonment. So now you protect your energy not from fear, but from reverence. You no longer resent people for taking too much. You take responsibility for what you allow. You no longer feel guilty for pulling back. You feel empowered by it. You no longer fear being misunderstood. You understand yourself. That's what matters most. Because when you are at peace with yourself, no one can disturb you without your permission. Let them wonder why you're distant. Let them miss the version of you that was always available. Let them project whatever stories they need to feel better about your absence. You're not here to be understood by everyone. You're here to be whole. And sometimes being whole means being quiet, still, disconnected from noise, and deeply connected to truth. So keep withdrawing when needed. Keep returning when ready. And above all, keep choosing yourself. Not because it's trendy, not because it makes a statement, but because it's the most honest, most sacred thing you can do in a world that constantly asks you to give more than you have. You don't need to explain your peace, you just need to live in it.